So at this point, I'd like to invite Mr. Pavan Duggal, who is an advocate in Supreme Court of India. He's a well-known advocate working on areas like IP and cyber law, and he's also the president of the Cyber Law Asia. May I request Mr. Duggal to please give his views on how some of these risks can be tackled and minimized.
5:20 in the evening is a challenging time for a tired audience. And surely you get even more tired when you realize that the data that you have stored somewhere on the cloud is not accessible to you. You take the Gmails and the Hotmails of the world to be gospel truths, and in case if they're not available, you are in a panic mode. But think again. Apart from whatever ramifications that Sanjay has taught you, there are a large number of legal ramifications to what you do, and you need to be alive to that. I understand this is not legal audience, but I will just ask you one question. You belong to various organizations, ministries, departments. I have a fundamental question. Is your entity, your organization, providing any service on network? Do you provide any service? Whether it's an information service, or does your entity provide any email connectivity to your employees? Or you provide any website to your customers or citizens? Or more so, you land up saving data belonging to others. If you do any of these aforesaid, you have to wake up, because apart from other things, there's law that's slowly going to go on your necks. We have in India a law which is known as the Indian Information Technology Act 2000. And in that law, an amendment came across in the year 2008. But that amendment was a game changer, because it introduced for the first time a new concept known as an intermediary concept. Now, anybody in the audience can tell me what's an intermediary? What is an intermediary? Sir? Intermediary? In between.
That person in between.
In between. So, is your organization in between somebody? That's a big question that you have to ask in an internet networked world. Clearly, a couple of weeks back, one man got a huge reprieve in his life. This man was called Avnish Bajaj. This man is known in common lingo as the then CEO of Bazi.com. A case of Bazi which rocked India in 2004 had no takers when it was finally decided in 2012 by the Indian Supreme Court. Two students of a Delhi school uploading sex MMS known as the DPS MMS on a Bazi.com website now known as eBay.in, and the CEO of Bazi was arrested. 6 days behind bars for his capacity as the person in charge of this organization. And mind you, the website did not show the obscene MMS. It only provided a link that came from one of its members who said, if you do not have got the famous DPS MMS, we can give it to you for 100 rupees a download. For that entire message, a criminal case was lodged for online obscenity, continued for 8 years till a couple of weeks back the Supreme Court put a lid on that and finally discharged Avnish Bajaj. But while the kind of tamasha that took place in corporate India in 2005, thanks to this case, was overhyped, by the time this case met up with its demise, there were no takers. But this case has woken up once again, because today, if you look at the Indian law, you will have to be slightly uncomfortable. And I think slightly uncomfortable is a gross understatement. Because if you are dealing with any of the 7 parameters, you have to wake up. What are these 7 parameters? These are the 7 parameters that go on to make the digital ecosystem. If you're using computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data and information in the electronic form, you have to wake up. Why? Because somewhere down the line, you or your organization are likely to become intermediaries. If you're an intermediary, then you have some trouble. Well, it's some good news and lots of bad news. If you're an individual, you could also be an intermediary, but if you are a one-man or a two-man company and you're providing email connectivity to your employee, you become a network service provider. You don't have to be the Bharatis and the Aircels and the VSLs of the world to be known as intermediary. You can be the India Habitat Centers of the world to also be an intermediary. If you're an intermediary, and 9.9 incidentally also is an intermediary. So if you're an intermediary, the law asks you to do some simple things. Number one, comply with the law. Number two, exercise due diligence while you discharge your obligations in the law. And number three, do not sleep in bed with somebody who's violating the law. If you follow these three principles, life is safe. But if you do not follow any one of these three, you get exposed to two kinds of liabilities. There is an exposure to civil and criminal liability. Civil exposure could expose you or your organization to damages by way of compensation up to 5 crore rupees per contravention. The beauty of the word is per contravention. So there are 10 contraventions, multiply 5 crores into 10, 50 crores. In addition, you can also be exposed to potential criminal liability, which could be ranging from 3 years imprisonment to life imprisonment, and fine ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 10 lakh rupees. These are the multiple exposures that the intermediaries of India have today. So what's the bottom line? If you are dealing, handling or processing third-party data or sensitive personal data or information, you are required now to have in place reasonable security practices and procedures. And what's a reasonable security practices and procedures? Somehow the law has this huge fascination for long-winded words. Reasonable security practices and procedures. Well, if you're an ISO 27001 compliant entity, you comply with reasonable security practices and procedures. And today, a lot of litigation has already begun. Government is one of the biggest intermediaries in India. Governmental departments are intermediaries. Ministries are intermediaries. The CSIRs of the world are intermediaries. Anybody you take it is likely to be an intermediary. That's the huge scope of the Indian cyber law. And you all need to be a bit more careful because litigation has begun. Don't expect that nothing is going to happen. The potentiality of something that could impact you can be enormous. And you can only get to know about it once it's hit you. And the bad news is that once something hits you, you can do almost nothing in retrospective effect. You can do nothing in backdate to potentially limit the exposure of your liability. I'd just like to wind up by this example. This is the recent case that has happened. A lot of these things keep on happening. They're just not being reported. A governmental department somewhere in India is storing, processing, dealing sensitive personal data. And what is sensitive personal data? Any data which includes information pertaining to passwords, information pertaining to biometrics, your sexual orientation, whether you are gay, you are lesbian, or information pertaining to medical health and related aspects. That data being processed by the department apparently is copied by somebody who's not allowed to copy it, and then that is sold in the public domain for consideration, suddenly exposing the said department to consequences. Well, the matter somehow tends to get settled down, there are no actions taken, but these are just wake-up calls. Today when a matter comes to me, the first thing I close my eyes is, okay, let's find out who these intermediaries are. Let's pick up. The moment you pick up the intermediaries, you already realize that the canvas is well set. Intermediaries today become your tool, your ladder towards the final people who could potentially be targeted. So when this film called Singham came almost about a year and a half back, the producers thought that they are going to hit jackpot. So before the release of the film, they went up to the Delhi High Court saying, sir, we are going to have a blockbuster film, and we anticipate it's going to be pirated on the internet. So please give us a blanket order restraining unknown people from pirating the film on the digital platform. And the Delhi High Court gave a huge blanket order, which is known as a John Doe order, directing injuncted unknown persons from pirating this film on any digital platforms. Of course, some internet service providers were made parties, and they were also directed to ensure that their networks are not going to be misused for the purposes of doing piracy. The film got released, the film was a blockbuster, but this experiment succeeded. The trade figures showed us that the piracy with this film dramatically got reduced in India because there was a huge pressure of contempt being instituted against internet service providers who would allow such piracy on the networks. Now, these are various ways of how the Indian judiciary is trying to work out things today. If you think that this laptop is all yours and that you got privacy on what's in your laptop, think again. Normally you expect to have a sense of privacy or right to privacy against the state. But can you have privacy against your private employer? I know of employers here sitting 4 kilometers from this place who install deliberate programs on their systems of their employees, on the communication devices of the employees, which gives exact mirror copy of each and every web page that they ever access and each and every keystroke that they ever put on their devices. We have those examples also in our country, but clearly the law is slowly moving up. There's some developments towards protecting privacy, and now last year the Delhi High Court has held that every person has got an intrinsic right of privacy over the data that he stores in his computer, his laptop, in his mobile phone, and that the same cannot be accessed without proper permission or authorization. Now that's the beginning of the way how things are happening. A lot of things are currently happening, but if you're talking about cyberspace, data, you'll have to be realizing that the IT Act is not somewhere away in the horizon. The IT Act is today India's mother legislation for entire things digital. In fact, if you look at the significance of the IT Act, you realize that out of all laws passed by the Parliament of Independent India, from the time of independence till today, if you were to talk of 3 most significant legislations, the Information Technology Act 2000 will be one of those 3 most significant legislations. Why? Because it's the only law in India that impacts anything digital. So it's not just computers, computer systems, but also all kinds of communication devices. And the law now even covers devices which can be used to communicate audio, video, image, or text. You don't need to be a smartphone, you don't need to be a mobile phone. Any device. So my refrigerator, who's having smart programming therein, also gets amenable to the law. In this kind of a scenario, it's very interesting to see how law is going to evolve, but users will have to be careful of how they use data. Governments will have to be increasingly careful of having in place reasonable security practices and procedures. There's by and large complete non-compliance with IT Act. IT Act is one of the most significant legislations of independent India, yet if you at random take 100 companies in India and ask them how compliant they are with the Indian IT Act, 98 of them would not be seen to be compliant with the IT Act. 1 out of that 100 may be aware of some compliances, and the other one may be doing something more. But that's the level of ignorance. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, ignorance of law is no excuse in the eyes of law. Once something gets come to you, it's going to be very hard. And my experience under the IT Act shows it's a small legislation, but it's a huge huge black hole. Now, once it's so easy to get sucked into the black hole, and it's so difficult to get out. For an organization, if you're going to be sucked into the IT Act, the huge ramifications, not just upon your organization, but upon your reputation and your perception as a secure, as a reliable business entity itself is likely to be immensely impacted. So the focus is back on compliances, and the government is very clear. The government has come up with the Information Technology Rules 2011, which are mandated to be followed. And if you do not comply with those rules, again, there are going to be problems. So it's very interesting space in which we are currently working in. And with the increased mobility, we had these 2 wonderful presentations in this session on mobility. Mobiles are going to be, if not already, the center of our lives. And these mobiles are also going to be the center of our problems, because our problems are going to originate from mobiles. Our exposures, radioactive, legal or otherwise, are going to start from mobiles. And more significantly, it are these mobiles that will potentially determine the legal landscape of how the legislation, how the law and how the jurisprudence around the subjects evolve as time passes by. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Mr. Duggal, for a very succinct and concise, rendition of how exposed you may be to the law. Thank you. And as always, you were very lucid and clear. Thank you.